Hi everyone, you're about to watch one of my Formula 1 videos and I have to apologise for the audio. Something happened, I'm not sure what. I'm going to have to completely destroy my audio setup and we'll get something sorted for future videos. If you don't like listening to the tinny sound, then I have a paste bin down in the description that gives you all the notes for the video. What's your minimum specification?
Hi everyone. I know some of you watch me for the tech news and the tech content. I'm also a big avid Formula One fan, and part of this channel is going to be my discussions about the current Formula One seasons and what's going on in the Formula One market. I already did one video explaining how Formula One uses custom CPUs. You can, there we go. I'll put a card up here so you can see that. But in this video, I want to talk about what's happening with regards to the current Formula One driver situation, and in particular the announcement that was made the other day that Sebastian Vettel is going to be leaving Ferrari. This is pretty big news. We weren't expecting such a big name to leave a big team at the end of the year. But now with a seat vacant, there's a lot of discussion about who's going to take that seat, and I want to go through some of my thoughts with you. While we're doing this, so it's not just a talking head video, I have prepared some of my Formula One 2019 driving. It's terrible. I play on a very low difficulty, as you'll see. I'm also terrible at driving. So with Vettel, who's out of Ferrari, Ferrari have Charles Leclerc in contract until 2023 or beyond. It's a 5-year contract. They've made very clear that Charles is the number one driver in that team, and that's where the future of the team lies. So what they need is a good number two driver who will sit in the wings, be happy to finish second, third, back the number one driver up, help the number one slipstream in certain racetracks like Monza, that sort of thing. Ferrari is very used to this sort of number one, number two dynamic. And part of the reason why the relationship between Vettel and Charles broke down is because the team isn't used to handling two really good drivers. So there are a number of options about who can get the seat in Ferrari. It's a prized seat, top team. You expect somebody good to get it. Number one of that list, I think, on the drivers' market right now is Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo spent several seasons at Red Bull and is currently on a 2-year contract with Renault. Now, he left Red Bull because he was dissatisfied with the treatment of the treatment of him with Max Verstappen and the team. And he wanted a change, and Renault came and offered him quite a lot of money. And Daniel is offered perhaps more money than anybody else on the grid outside of the top 3 teams. And he is a fast, experienced driver. He's a race winner. But he himself is a character. He doesn't fit a traditional number one, number two dynamic. Even though he's full of smiles, you don't get to be a racing driver unless you're just a tiny bit selfish. So he, going into that, will know that Charles is the de facto number one in that team, but he wants to prove himself. He wants to make sure that he's ready to pounce whenever Charles falters. Right now he's with Renault and he's not really satisfied with Renault. They performed worse than McLaren in 2019 when their goal was to be number 4th in the championship. They couldn't even manage that. Even though he's with the works team, at the end of the day, the driving result isn't where he wants to be. And there is a rumor that he's going to move to McLaren next year in 2021. That's still just a rumor. That would be funny given that the relationship he has with Lando Norris. He would be taking the seat of Carlos Sainz Jr. If that was true, which is funny because Carlos Sainz Jr. is the second pick to go to that Ferrari seat. Now, Carlos he's fairly young, but his experience has now been in F1 a few years. He's been on the podium tail end of 2019, but he's not used to being right at the front of the grid in F1. He has in previous championships, but F1 maybe not. So even though he is young and Charles Leclerc is younger still, would he be happy playing the number 2 role? He's young. He's a racing driver. He's still hungry for wins. McLaren still wants him. They really love having that Sainz and Norris relationship. He has great rapport there. But the question is, would McLaren take Ricciardo and then Sainz go off to Ferrari? I mentioned Ricciardo has a great rapport with Norris too. Ricciardo has been after wanting a Mercedes engine for a while, and McLaren will be getting that. Carlos would be happy going to Ferrari if it didn't necessarily disrupt the dynamic and he could still achieve what he wanted. I mean, Carlos was the best of the rest in 2019. Third option for this seat is a traditional Italian racing driver, Giovinazzi. He's currently racing for Alfa Romeo. He's more than willing to move up into the team. He is inexperienced, and Ferrari ideally want an experienced driver. The thing is, Giovinazzi hasn't really set the world alight with his driving at Alfa, but he is Italian, and he would be the first Italian in a Ferrari since Giancarlo Fisichella in 2009. And yeah, he would happily be playing number 2, but he still has to prove himself on the stage. If he'd had a few, 6th or 7th places in the Alfa, maybe even one of the rare podiums, he might be in for more of a shout than he is currently. Number 4 on my list of who could get the seat is Sergio Perez. He is a proven midfield talent. He's experienced, he's committed. He spent 1 year at a top team, but that didn't go so well. That was when he was younger. But he's now got that experience with the Force India, now Racing Point, soon to be Aston Martin. And he does really well in that midfield. He knows how to be in control of himself, which seems a weird thing to say for a Formula One driver, but he seems very assured of his abilities. And he isn't reckless. He's calm and he's calculating. And a lot of people like him on the grid. Thing is, he's already committed to the Racing Point Aston Martin team for the next few years. So there are contract issues. Racing Point surely would have a price if Ferrari wanted Checo to go there. Now, I'm sure Ferrari could pay it quite easily. That depends on who else is available for that seat. Now, the outsider for the seat is Romain Grosjean. Wearing Romain Grosjean Lotus top here today. He currently drives for Haas, which is the Ferrari kind of like B sister team, even though they kind of won't admit it. Haas buy all their equipment from Ferrari. And he was at one point in his career tipped to drive for Ferrari through the Ferrari driver program. Problem is, even though he's experienced, then he would happily play for number 2. And he would jump at the experience to drive in a Ferrari. Is that he has a history, not only of crashes, he kind of, got rid of that over the last couple of years. It's still not perfect. But if the car isn't to his liking, he kind of implodes on himself. He doesn't drive that well when the car doesn't work, and he makes stupid decisions. Which means that if Ferrari are in a situation where they don't have the best car, then he could very much crumble down the lowers of the grid. So he's perhaps not malleable enough for that sort of role. But he would happily be the number 2 because he knows he would be lucky to get there. Now, people definitely not getting the seat. These are people I'm ruling out straight away. Number 1 is the obvious one, is Hamilton. There were reports of Hamilton speaking with Ferrari at the beginning of last year. He has said in the past that Ferrari would be one of his life goals to drive for, and who would want to drive for a Ferrari? Though recently he's been posting rallying cries on social media about his commitment to stay with Mercedes, even though he hasn't figured out that contract with Mercedes. He wants to be there. You can tell he wants to be there. Mercedes are the ones that would pay him as well. I'd argue that Ferrari perhaps would offer him the same amount of money. And Mercedes is still the team to beat. Now, if we were talking a few years down the line when he's a bit older, I mean, he's in his early to mid 30s now. If he was a bit older, sort of like approaching his 40s, and he was in the final year of what he wants to be in the sport, if Leclerc had somebody driver in Ferrari had that big contract and they wanted a number 2, Hamilton would perhaps go for the final year of his Formula One, single year contract, and he might do something there. As far as it stands, If there is a time for Hamilton going to Ferrari, this really isn't it. Second driver definitely not going to Ferrari is Max Verstappen. Max has a contract with Red Bull for 2023. And you can make sure that if Ferrari wanted Verstappen, Red Bull would have a very big break clause in that contract, and I doubt that Ferrari would pay for it. I mean, aside from whether that would go towards the cost cap or not is a different question indeed. I mean, Max is skillful enough that you can see he wants to go and drive for a works team. I mean, you could argue that Red Bull is Honda's works team, but it's not in the same way that Mercedes or Ferrari or Renault. Max wouldn't necessarily go to Renault, but being in a works team has advantages, and he'd be in a Ferrari, he'd be able to capitalize more on the mistakes that Vettel had. The way Max has pushed the Red Bull in 2019 shows that all the mini mistakes that Vettel made just as a result of him, I don't know, aging or losing interest, Max would pounce on them straight away, even if, there was a counts he may have gotten, a few penalties. He would do that. He's that sort of person. But if he wants a different team, he's going to have to wait. And what he's going to have to hope is that nobody, or whoever sits in that number 2 seat in the Red Bull, doesn't kind of pull a Verstappen. I'm really kind of hoping Albon actually picks up his game and gets a few podiums when we eventually get racing. The third person, who I definitely know won't go in this seat, is George Russell. I'm a fan of George Russell. He would be an outside shot for the seat if there ever was one. I was speaking to Brett Howes, who also writes at Anantech, and we were joking about Russell going to Ferrari. He's young. He's proved himself in that Williams. He outqualified Kubica, however you want to pronounce it, 21-0, and he's very well liked in the paddock. And he's an up-and-coming talent. But Russell is committed to the Mercedes path. And you can bet that when a seat becomes free at Mercedes, either Hamilton retires or Mercedes decides not to renew that Bottas contract, between Ocon and Russell, there's going to be a fight for that seat. And that would be fun. So after the ones who are probably in the running and the ones who are definitely not in the running, here's some outside tips that might be worth thinking about. Number 1 is Raikkonen. Now, Raikkonen's old. He's a known face at Ferrari. This would be his 3rd time at the team. He's been a number 2. He knows the ins and outs, and he would get straight down to work. One of the problems we often hear with Raikkonen is that sometimes his feedback isn't so great. So, if he went there, would it just be for like a 1-year contract? He's still fast. He's had ups and downs in Alfa Romeo. But if he's fast, is he as fast as a Leclerc, as a Hamilton, as a Verstappen? The thing with Raikkonen is, even though, yes, he is a world champion, if you put him in a Ferrari now, would he just be fighting with Albon and Bottas for most of the year? Would he be able to provide that backup to Leclerc? And I'm not entirely sure that he would. Plus, when he was still when he left Ferrari, it wasn't exactly a bed of roses, but he is still part of that family. Now, the other option for Ferrari would be bringing back Fernando Alonso. Alonso has been mentioned as an outside choice, but to be honest, I don't actually see that happening. He spent several years with the team during a downturn in performance. He left on poor terms when they failed to deliver over and over again. I mean, he then went on to McLaren, where it was arguably even worse, but over time he kind of saw the bright side and the funny side, and he's mellowed out a bit in his old age. But Fernando isn't the guy to be in that number 2 role at Ferrari. Having been a number 1 there, he definitely doesn't want to be a number 2. Plus, I think he's more focused right now on getting the Triple Crown than he is in returning to F1. If he would return to F1, I don't even know what team he'd go in. So, yeah. Options for Ferrari, I'm pretty sure Ricciardo or Sainz has that seat. I would argue that Sainz is embedded in McLaren. So if Ricciardo going to McLaren is just fake news, then Ricciardo should probably get that seat. And and I'd like to see Dan in red, and that would be an exciting pairing on the grid. So that's Ferrari. What about Sebastian? Where does Sebastian go? he has two main options. He can either stay or he can retire from Formula One and go drive in a different series. If Ricciardo gets that Ferrari seat, I could see Vettel taking the Renault seat for the sake of staying inside a works team, because Renault is that works team. The issue is pairing him with Ocon, it'd probably be an explosive year. Now, for some reason, I don't think the way that Vettel works necessarily gels with the way that Renault works. And with Ocon as a teammate, the two have history. Renault would love to have a star like Vettel if Ricciardo left. The alternative would actually be recalling the Hulk, and I think that would be a safer bet for them. Nico Hulkenberg. Now, Vettel could also go to Alfa Romeo in the same way that Raikkonen went that way. Vettel could as well. It's still that kind of, it's another one of those, Ferrari sub teams. It would probably require Ricciardo either getting promoted to Ferrari or retiring out of the sport completely, because Giovinazzi still has that contract with them. I think Vettel would work better with the Alfa team than with Renault, but the issue is he would languish at the back of the grid, and I don't necessarily think Vettel would like that. He did well enough for Toro Rosso back in the day when he was that sort of midfield back in the grid, came out with a win there. Maybe he could rekindle this spirit for the sport by being at the back of the grid. I don't know. In a similar vein to Alpha, the other option is to go with Haas, because they again are another Ferrari sub team, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Gunther Steiner would love to insert somebody in between Kevin and Romain, Magnussen Grosjean there. The problem is I don't think a Kevin Sebastian or a Romain Sebastian pairing would necessarily be any less explosive than the current pairing of Kevin and Romain. I mean, I have no doubt that Vettel would perform better, but Sebastian would want to go in the team as a number one driver. And Kevin wouldn't like that at all, and there would just be arguments all the way through the season. I don't necessarily think Vettel gets on with Romain because of Romain having that issue where if the car's not perfect, he kind of implodes. That being said, Vettel and Romain are both recent fathers, so perhaps there will be some settling down, some bonding between them, or ultimately neither of them will have an edge in the sport anymore. And the other alternate option is that Vettel could leave Formula One. He rushed into the scene with a Toro Rosso win, then followed it up with 4 consecutive titles, 2 of which were hotly contested right until the end. Now he's had several years of Ferrari with a lot of silverware, plus he has a family. Is there enough in him? Is there enough essence of spirit, of fight in him to keep going in Formula One? I guess we'll find out. Super silly season, where all the drivers talk about where they're going to go and all these rumors fly out, have started earlier this year. Perhaps because there's no Formula One to talk about. I mean, there's esports, yes, and some of that's exciting, but all races are being postponed, and we don't know when the first race is going to be this year. So everybody's talking about where everyone is going, and Vettel's kind of kicked this off by announcing that he's not staying at Ferrari. So I don't know. I love the fact when things like this happen, when Rosberg left, for example, Mercedes, when he retired, I love that sort of shake-up that it can do to the grid. It provides a lot of entertainment for all of us, and it's funny watching the commentators get all the names wrong because they still think everybody races for the previous team. It also gives a chance for drivers to show their skill and new drivers to come through the pack, replacing some of the weaker talents on the grid. So that's my what will Vettel do ramble. Thank you for watching TechTechPotato. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and there's a bell here if you want notifications for future videos. Thank you for watching.